Greetings, wanderers, friends. It's November 1st. Now, I decided at the last minute I was all ready to do something for Halloween. I had Zoltar ready. Actually, I didn't have Zoltar ready. Zoltar is my head in a bubble. I'll show you at the end. Zoltar, I have to get out of my seat. I like this picture. It's my living quarters in the mirror. So you can see the Synergetics dictionary there and some of the other books. A lot of these, again, are loaned to me by another student of Wittgenstein. So, like all the books on the shelf, second from the bottom almost, are. Is that my Wittgenstein books? No, second from the top are the Wittgenstein books. Anyway, fun picture. Fun picture. So, what I want to talk about is actually books. I just want to do a quick one today. Some of you are into, because of the Prouty connection and a lot of what I talk about, you're already into like kind of covert kind of operations kind of stories, spy stories. That's a genre, right? You go to any bookstore, including Powell's, and you're going to have that genre, right? So I'm going to give you a couple titles there because, truth be told, grunge.net is in that genre because of how it's written, and get into it, you'll find out what I'm talking about. Okay. I'm into, by the way, the Bob Dobbs iconography. You'll find it even in terms of my Facebook avatar. I like to use this. It's partly to just keep it a little bit light and fun and not too deep. Sometimes we get too deep. We don't need to when we don't need to. So in terms of the reason I clicked on this earlier, which is in Willamette Week, it's like place based. I like to start a story, and here we have a Portland lawyer, cloak and dagger, so on and so on. And we have this lawyer named Kaplan, and interviews and stuff, and it all actually is about, it's a footnote in this bigger story about torture taxis. And this book, very small, the title is Torture Taxi on the Trail of the CIA's Rendition Flights. And it's really a small book, and probably not many of you have ever seen it. So I'm gonna do a couple like this. Like another one for you conspiracy people is, of all the Kennedy books, and there are many, and I'm not saying this is the best, but it's one that I've read, and so if you reference it in your YouTube, I'll at least be able to turn to the page number, right? It's like, oh, that's one of the ones I have, and one of the ones I've read. Because there's, again, a big section of the bookstore devoted to all of this stuff. I think in terms of bookstores, a lot. Powell's Books right here in Portland. By the way, Glenn came by today, gave me very nice. Looks like I'll have this in future episodes, right? This reminds me of what's that British comedy show on BritBox that we're getting? BBC Spitting Image. Watching that now. I've got some Facebook connections too. Recent episodes. Hope people absorb British culture, right? It's important. It's part of our heritage. Logicomix. This one is philosophy department, although I think the background of those who worked on it is computer science quite a bit. But what happened? The Bertrand Russell stuff, all that propositional calculus, so-called logic, it became operational. What do we mean by that? You can run it on a computer. After a while, it turned into coding languages with Turing and all that kind of stuff, and von Neumann and all that. There's a lot of history there. Grace Hopper, Ada Byron. This book, I showed it before, and I kind of bleeped over that right next to Grunch, I was not paying attention. I went back and watched the video later, and it looked like it skipped over some Grail stuff right next to Grunch. Grail Grunch, right? Grail Grunch. So I should have got more into, Great Pirates too. Great Pirates relates very much to the Bucky corpus. Let's see what he says. Yeah, he cross references to grunge right there. I'm not sure I've seen that before. That, as I mentioned, was my URL back when I had teleport. So I think we don't need to emphasize the Grail stuff here anyway, because that's like Da Vinci Code. It's been covered, right? Dan Winter's done that. I'm not going to try to get into that stuff. And this one is what I would get into: eugenics, racism, the meme viruses that have caused a lot of suffering in our time. This one is obviously Glenn's because he's the one who does all these little stickers. He reads very carefully. By meme viruses, I mean, for example, the military industrial complex that we all suffer from. It's a virus. It's bad. It's really bad. And I show this book as like the antidote, but I'm only somewhat serious about that because I am not an expert on Gurdjieff and Uspensky, really. I listen to a bunch. I study like you do, but I have a different background. So you don't see me doing a lot in this channel about the work and stuff. But process work, there you go. Arnie Mindell. There's a Process Work Institute right here in Portland, and that I have been to. And in future videos, let's talk about that more. How about it? Anyway, that was mostly books. Oh, on Sam Hill. If you go back to the Quaker legend, Sam Hill. That's a little tongue-in-cheek there because most Quakers don't know anything about him. But you can see my video on him if you just go back a little ways. Obviously, some of my information about his story came from this book. I also had the good fortune to hear a talk by one of the museum directors there. So I blended together several sources. I didn't cite them all. Okay, I guess that's enough loose ends for now. This one, by the way, War Against the Weak. This is about how the philosophy that drove a lot of the atrocities in Germany during World War II certainly had a following here in North America. And it's something we talk about quite a bit. And when it comes to fighting fascism and, Prouty. You want to go back and read about the Spanish Civil War in the lead up to World War II. You want to read about what was going on in Spain, why was Hemingway trying to get the Roosevelts on board to fight fascism, and what was so hard about doing that? Well, partly there is a big fascist stream here, if you want to call it that. Remember the story of Smedley Butler? We've gone over that already. I'm not always going to repeat everything, and you don't always get to this synchronous or in sequence, right? So I have a big sympathy for people who don't come to this in sequence. So there are places where we take up the business plot in more detail and how it succeeded after a failure or two. And finally, to settle out, what would I normally be doing around Halloween before COVID? There's the one person who came for Halloween, somebody I know. We didn't want to have a face, though, so this was my one visitor for Halloween. I'd already turned off the lights, and I get a knock at my door, and it's like, well, that's pretty bold to knock at my door when the lights are off, and I turned another light off, and got another knock. So then I knew this is probably somebody I know, and in fact it was. So I just wanted to say what I would usually be doing around now on Halloween in my normal cycle would be teaching adults some Python. And I notice more adults are starting to pop up on the kid radar. Like when you teach kids now, there's a lot of adults who want to cram around the screen too and be part of it officially. Like they want to learn Python too. That's back to my free high school for everyone meme. It's high school we need. It's high school where you learn Python, right? And what I'd normally be doing is using code like this, where we have a Halloween class, and the things you can do with it are enter and exit. And it's like, well, how do you do that? You just call these methods, and actually you don't. You use a with statement, and you let the with statement trigger the enter as you go into an indented section of code. That's what we call the context. And as you go into that, you can write a class that does a lot of stuff, set some settings, precision, for example. I don't say much except I set up a trick or treat list of trick or treat, right? And then depending on what happens randomly, in this case, I either raise a trick exception or not. And then I get more complicated. Like once they have the basic idea, we get into a much more complicated game of Spooky Castle. But again, this is for adults, and it's not really that we're teaching how to code games or anything like that. It's just philosophy, right? Language games. The way you learn the grammar of a language is you watch it in certain little tight situations, which we can call games, right? That's the Wittgenstein approach. We combine that with place-based, and we make sure to use a lot of right brain geometric thinking, not just left brain. And because we do history, and especially American history, and especially some of this more covert stuff sometimes, we have the books that I mentioned, Grunch of Giants and some others. If you're just joining us, I'm going to fade out on this home page, which will help you get oriented as to where I am on the internet and how you can follow up if you want to. Grunch.net, it's just a WordPress site, nothing too special. Underneath of it, though, is the archaeological layer from the 90s of hand-coded HTML tables, which I use for format. And this is where you can dig down and study your American heritage in ways you may not be getting in your more expensive university education for reasons we are going to discuss. In fact, I'm interested in your views on that. So in terms of we're going to discuss it, I'd like to hear your views. Never mind mine. All right, talk to you later.